Hello and welcome to a brand new Luminar Neo video. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to achieve a minimal aesthetic in a busy urban environment, finding a way to strip away all of the density of the city and be left with a simple yet distinctive element that still captures the essence of the city. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, typically with my street photography, it is anything but minimal. It's full of signs, overhead cables, colorful reflections, and overall it's very busy. And that's by intention, of course. I want to show the density of the city with my photography. So for someone like me, minimal photography is almost a foreign concept. So let's take a look at what constitutes as a minimal composition as opposed to a regular street photography shot, and certainly from what I usually shoot. So there are different types of minimal photography, but with minimal street photography, you need to be able to showcase an urban element, and that can get pretty tricky when you are shooting in a dense city, such as I do. I shoot in Seoul. Now, Seoul is really dense. It's dense with buildings, with signs and advertisements, and it's also dense with people. It's home to around 10 million people, and that's more than London, except that London's 2.6 times bigger than Seoul. So when you consider that and the fact that Seoul is also pretty mountainous, there's quite a few mountains in the city, the actual areas which you can build on and the areas which I go around and shoot are extremely dense. So how do you get around that to be able to shoot minimal street photography? Now, at its core, minimal street photography will strip away all the distractions and keep only the essential elements, and there will be fewer subjects too, maybe just one in the frame. Really, you just want to aim for one at a time in the frame. So let's take a look at some examples then of minimal street photography. So first of all, let's take a look at an isolated subject. Now, here are a few examples of isolated subjects, but it's not quite minimal. And I would argue that's due to there being other elements that can distract the viewer, such as the signs around our subject. Now, they are certainly more minimal than my regular work, but we can still cut down on the distractions. This is where I'm creating a more simple composition rather than a minimalist one. So here are some other examples where we have a subject, but our composition is immediately drawn to our subject. And whilst we have other elements in our frame, the eye doesn't wander as much as in the other photos. So essentially, we can still have a subject, of course, but we need to avoid any other clutter and any other eye-catching elements such as signs, for example. So especially when there's writing involved as well, because your brain is going to automatically read those signs. So that's a distraction. And that means you've already looked away from your subject. We can also focus on the geometry and structure of buildings in the city, and this is a very effective way to avoid any clutter in your images. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this style of minimal street photography is any easier, and that's because you're going to have to capture a minimal subject while ensuring your photo remains impactful and, of course, aesthetically pleasing. Now, I'm going to show you some examples on the screen now, and you can find some really interesting shapes and designs in modern architecture. Seoul has some fantastic modern architecture, and I'm always on the lookout for new buildings whilst I'm out on my shoot. So I suggest you do the same. Head out into your city and find some modern architecture and look for those shapes, lines, and curves to help build up your image. We can also create minimalism through color. So we can have quite a muted palette and perhaps the pop of a single color within your frame. And that's because too many colors could be distracting for the viewer. So by stripping away all of those distractions and leaving just one or two colors at the most, you can achieve a minimal look. Now, the great thing about this is that it can be achieved either through finding these moments in the city yourself or during post-processing, where you can edit your image and take away some of the colors or mute them a little bit, desaturate them, and boost up the saturation and luminance of other colors that you want to pop through. Otherwise, you could strip away all of the color and just go for a black and white image, and then that would ensure that there are no more color distractions and that all focus is solely on the subject of your frame. So we need to look for those quiet moments in the city. We're looking for those pockets of calm, and this can be any street corner, a single person walking past, a blank wall, or a simple architectural feature. Now, we can still capture something as dense as a cityscape and still ensure that it looks minimal. Now, I've got a photo that I took just here, and to ensure that it remained minimal, I made use of negative space so that the city takes up a very small portion at the bottom of the image. Now, negative space can be a crucial aspect of minimal photography. Minimal space means empty or open space around your subject, and to ensure that it still looks strong compositionally, we should still be able to immediately tell what the subject of your image is. It can help your subject stand out, and it devoids the image of any distractions, and it can also create a sense of scale. Not to mention the emotional aspect of what negative space can bring. It can bring up feelings of emptiness, loneliness, isolation, so it can be very impactful visually. So you need to make sure that your negative space is clean and open, and you can achieve this by using negative space such as the sky or a blank wall behind your subject, and you can also consider using it as a storytelling tool. Other minimal approaches to urban photography is to highlight small details and textures within your environment, or the interplay of light and shadow in your photo. Now, my usual style is of neon night photography, and I wanted to try and capture a minimal style photo within this theme. So I took this photo here, and it shows a sign in a reflection. And I know this goes against the idea of having writing and signage within your image, but in this case it is the only subject within my photo, and I've also made use of negative space around the puddle as well. So let's jump into a photo edit and work out ways in which we can make a minimalist shot, not just from the photos that we take, but also how we approach and edit as well. And the first thing that I'm doing with this shot is cropping right in and getting rid of any distractions that are going on around the outside of the frame, and having my subject immediately recognizable. And this is the window of a record shop right here, and making sure that all of the attention is on that. Now that's looking good. We've got plenty of room around that window, but it's still immediately clear that that is our subject. Now what I want to do is make sure that there's a lot of contrast going on. I want these white tiles to be very bright and pronounced, and also have a heavy contrast with the shadow that's going on from the window frame there at the bottom. And I really like that feature of this photo, so I'm going to make sure that's very pronounced. And this will be a quick edit, nothing too serious. We'll run through a few tools to make sure that we do get that contrast, and obviously using the super contrast is one of those tools that will be crucial for this. It splits up the highlights, the mids and the shadows. And there we go, that's starting to come together. There's another handy little tool that I like to use, glow. Give that just a little bump. And there we go. The contrast that it brings is so nice. I really like that tool. Give that one a go for your photo edits as well. You don't need too much. And then I'm going to jump into color, and I want to make sure that that light inside looks really warm and inviting, but is not too dominant. So I'm going to use luminance mostly on that. So just to make it a little bit brighter, you know. And then back into develop, because I still think we can make that wall brighter. We use the whites only, because if I make the overall image brighter with exposure, then I'm losing some of that contrast from my shadows. So there we go, that's really starting to come together. That's how I envisioned it, but the light inside is a little bit too saturated, so let's bring that back a touch. There we go, nothing too drastic. And there we go. All right, so let's have a look at a before and after with this shot. And there you can see, I think that looks like a really nice minimalist photo there. Decided to make the photo even brighter by boosting up that white slider once more and working on those shadows. But this is the finished photo. Now I think it's an interesting one to talk about, because when we're looking at this minimalist style inside of that store, had there not been a shallow depth of field, we would have all of the details going on of the records on the shelves there, and I think that would look quite busy and cluttered. But because of that shallow depth of field, it's not that distracting, and I think that keeps our focus remain on the outside of this window, on the frame, you know, everything that's in focus, and including that shadow, which is a feature I really like. So what I would advise you to do as well is try this out. Try a shallow depth of field with your photo, so that all of that attention remains on your subject, but there's something going on in the background that helps build up the image, helps give it a little bit more substance, but it still maintains that minimalist style. So give a minimalistic approach in your next street photography session a try. Remember to look for those quiet moments in the city, and try to avoid as many distractions as possible, such as signage and writing, as well as numerous subjects in one frame. What you want to do is just try and strip away as much as possible, and also remember to make use of negative space as well that can help support your subject. I'll be back again in the next one, so I'll catch you then. Goodbye.